The desert had gone quiet in that unnerving way it did when everything that moved had either been killed or had the sense to stay down. The air still carried the acrid tang of spent gunpowder and the metallic bite of blood. Sergeant Lyra Kane crouched low behind the half-collapsed wall of a ruined outpost, her breathing ragged through the filter of a helmet whose visor was so scratched it blurred the horizon into a smear of orange and gray. She checked her rifle again, though she already knew what she would see, the ammo counter blinking red, nearly empty. 12 rounds. That was all. 12 rounds against the mob of raiders she could hear moving through the dust, their boots crunching like a swarm of insects spreading wide, circling, savoring the trap they had laid for her. She had faced death before, but never in such a hopeless arithmetic. Her squad was gone, torn apart in the ambush. She was the last one, the last line between the raiders and the southern caravan routes they had sworn to protect. The sun beat down on her back like a cruel overseer, and the sweat under her armor felt like it would drown her if bullets did not. She wanted to close her eyes and let exhaustion take her, but something colder kept her spine locked straight. It was not duty, not entirely, it was defiance, the stubborn refusal to let the universe erase her without a fight. She shifted her grip on the rifle and pressed her cheek to the scarred stock. Through the haze of dust and the shimmer of heat rising from the sand, movement revealed itself, shadows darting between the wreckage, flashes of crude armor, the glint of blades. The raiders were getting closer. They thought she was already broken, an animal cornered for their amusement. One of them shouted something guttural in a tongue she did not recognize, and laughter followed, cruel and confident. She remembered the faces of her squad in that moment. Derek with his crooked grin, Silva always humming under her breath before a fight, Juno who swore she would see the stars again once this desert campaign was over. All gone now, ripped apart in a storm of gunfire hours earlier, their bodies left to burn in the wreckage of the convoy. Lyra swallowed the grief like acid, let it sharpen her rage until her hands stopped trembling. She had 12 bullets and she swore each would matter. She fired the first when a raider leaned too far from cover, the shot cracking his skull open before he even realized he had been sighted. The second cut down a runner trying to flank her position. She moved like she was still part of a squad, repositioning after every burst, never letting them fix her in one place. Dust stung her throat and smoke burned her eyes, but she fought on, every trigger pull echoing like a hammer striking an anvil. 10 rounds. Then 8. Then 5. Their laughter dimmed, replaced by shouts of anger. They were still too many, too bold, and her rifle was running dry. Her shoulder throbbed where a fragment of shrapnel had dug deep, her side burned where something sharp had grazed her earlier. She could taste blood on her lips. She thought of her mother then, a face she hadn't seen in years, living far across the seas in a quiet fishing town. She thought of promises she had never kept, words she had never said, and wondered if her death here would ever reach her. 4 rounds. The raiders knew she was weakening now, she could hear it in the pace of their charge. Their boots hit the sand in rhythm, their guttural cries rising as they prepared to overwhelm her. She thought about saving one bullet for herself, a merciful exit before they could drag her into their cruelty. But the thought sickened her. She had not bled and clawed her way through this cursed desert only to die on her knees. She would go out standing even if it meant emptying her rifle into the void. 2 rounds left. She leaned out, squeezed the trigger, dropped another figure in the dust. The last round chambered with a metallic snap, echoing louder than it should have in her ears. And then, for the first time in hours, she hesitated. She aimed, but the world seemed to slow, every grain of sand suspended in the air. The raiders were roaring now, closing in, their silhouettes blotting out the sinking sun. She pulled the trigger, and the rifle clicked dry. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the desert itself held its breath. Lyra lowered the rifle, chest heaving, and for a heartbeat she simply stood there, weightless, as though she were already a ghost. That was when the sound came, a deep, mechanical growl far above, slicing through the sky. She looked up, squinting against the glare. There, cutting across the orange horizon, was a shape that should not have been there, not in this forsaken stretch of land. Sleek, black, silent save for that unnatural hum, it hovered like some phantom conjured from a half-remembered nightmare. The raiders froze too, their advance faltering, heads tilted skyward in awe and confusion. The aircraft, if it could be called that, carried no insignia, no markings. It shimmered faintly as if wrapped in cloaking glass, its edges dissolving into the sunlight. And then, with a precision that defied the raging wind, a single crate detached from its belly, dropping through the air with a hiss of stabilizers. Lyra's heart pounded. The crate landed with a thud not 10 meters from her cover, its frame bristling with locks that disengaged in a rapid sequence of metallic snaps. The lid sprang open and inside gleamed the impossible, rows of fresh ammunition, stacked neatly alongside supplies she hadn't seen in weeks. Water, medkits, even grenades. The raiders shouted in alarm now, realizing what had just arrived, their voices cracking with fear and fury. Lyra stared, disbelief warring with relief, her trembling hand reaching for the cartridges like a starving woman reaching for bread. She didn't stop to wonder who had sent it or why. All she knew was that the desert had not claimed her yet, and the fight was far from over. Lyra's fingers moved with the precision of instinct, slamming the fresh magazine into her rifle and racking the bolt with a sharp metallic crack that echoed across the battlefield like thunder. The raiders, who had moments ago been howling with victory, now faltered in their charge. She saw it in their movements, in the hesitation that rippled through their formation. Fear, sudden and raw. Whoever had sent that crate had shifted the balance, and now the hunters were unsure whether they remained hunters at all. Lyra rose from her crouch, bloodied and staggering but unbroken, the weight of exhaustion burned away by the fierce clarity of survival. She leveled her weapon and fired, each round finding a target, each burst driving them back. Dust plumed around their collapsing line as her shots cut through the chaos. They scattered for cover, their jeers replaced by curses, their confidence shattered in seconds. She advanced without thinking, her boots crunching on broken stone, her armor streaked with grime and blood, her eyes locked on the wavering silhouettes of her enemies. The crate behind her still gaped open like a promise, and she would not let it be wasted. She reloaded again and again, her rifle steady as if the weapon itself had fused to her bones. Bodies dropped in the sand, and the stench of charred metal and sweat thickened the air. Yet even as she pressed forward, questions clawed at the back of her mind. What phantom ship had come to her aid and why? There were no Allied patrols in this sector, no reinforcements within 100 miles, only enemies in the empty desert. Whoever had watched her through the storm had chosen her for reasons she could not fathom. But in the moment, the mystery mattered less than the survival it bought her. She fired until the dust itself seemed to bleed red, until her voice was raw from shouting, until her muscles screamed against the weight of her rifle. And then at last the silence returned, not the suffocating silence of despair she had known before the crate arrived, but the hollow quiet of aftermath, broken only by the groans of the wounded raiders dragging themselves away into the sand. She stood over them like an executioner, her shadow long in the setting sun. For a heartbeat she considered finishing them all, ending their threat forever. But her hands would not move, not with the weariness crashing down on her now that the fire of combat was dimming. She lowered her rifle, her chest heaving, and simply watched them vanish into the horizon, their courage broken and their bodies scarred by her defiance. Her knees buckled then, the adrenaline gone, leaving only the raw weight of pain and loss. She collapsed against the crate, pressing her head against its cold steel, and let out a laugh that broke into sobs. Relief, grief, disbelief, all tangled in one unbearable knot inside her chest. The desert wind whipped around her, carrying with it the scent of smoke and salt from her sweat. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. Her squad was gone and she was alone. Whoever had sent the phantom aircraft had saved her once, but there was no guarantee they would return. If she stayed here, the raiders would regroup, and this miracle would turn to ash. She had to move. She gathered supplies from the crate with trembling hands, ammunition stacked into pouches, grenades clipped to her belt, medkits stuffed into her pack. She found water, precious and clean, and drank until her cracked throat no longer burned. Strength seeped back into her limbs, though her wounds still ached. She patched them clumsily, biting down hard against the sting of antiseptic, and pushed herself to her feet again. The aircraft was gone now, vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. She scanned the sky until her eyes blurred, but there was nothing, only the vast, merciless expanse stretching to the horizon. Still, she felt watched, as if unseen eyes tracked her every move from some vantage she could not reach. She hefted her rifle, steadied herself, and began walking. The desert was a graveyard now, littered with twisted metal and silent corpses. Each step carried her past memories she could not escape, the scorched remains of Derek's helmet, Silva's scarf tangled in the rubble, Juno's sidearm half buried in the sand. She forced herself not to stop, not to look too long, because if she did the grief would chain her in place forever. She whispered their names instead, each one a vow that their deaths would not be meaningless. As the sun bled into the horizon, the sky turning purple and gold, she reached the edge of the battlefield and looked back one final time. The crate gleamed faintly in the fading light, like a beacon, like a question carved into the earth. She turned away before it could break her resolve and pressed on into the desert night. Hours passed. The stars emerged one by one, cold and distant, watching her stumble through the dunes. The sand shifted treacherously under her boots, and her wounds dragged at her, threatening to pull her down. But the thought of collapsing in this wasteland, of leaving her bones to be buried beneath endless drifts, drove her forward. Somewhere out there, beyond this dead land, was a friendly outpost, a line of defense still holding. If she could reach it, the sacrifice of her squad might still matter. She would not let their deaths fade into silence. But with every mile, her mind returned to the phantom aircraft. The way it had appeared, unmarked, silent, carrying salvation in its belly as if it had known exactly when and where she would fall. No ordinary patrol could have tracked her so precisely. No ally had the resources to send such a craft here, not without drawing the attention of the raiders long before. It was something else, something larger, and its presence gnawed at her like a secret too vast to ignore. Was she part of something greater now, some unseen design? Or had she simply been spared by chance, a lone survivor plucked from the jaws of death for reasons beyond comprehension? She clenched her fists around her rifle and pressed onward, the desert wind whispering through the night. Whatever the truth was, she intended to find it. The desert night was merciless, colder than steel and vast enough to swallow every thought that lingered too long. Lyra trudged across the shifting dunes with her rifle slung tight across her shoulder, every step a battle against exhaustion and pain. The stars above glittered like fragments of shattered glass, too distant to care for the struggles of a lone soldier staggering beneath them. Her breath formed white clouds against the visor of her helmet, and frost began to crust around the cracked seals of her armor. The water she had taken from the crate was running low, and though the medkits had dulled the sting of her wounds, her muscles still trembled with every motion. She pushed on, not because she believed she could endure forever, but because to stop would be to invite death to lay its hand on her shoulder. The thought of her squad, of their faces now ash and dust in the desert, remained the flame inside her chest. They had trusted her to lead them here, and even though she had failed to bring them back alive, she would not dishonor their memory by letting herself collapse into nothingness. Every step was an act of rebellion against the futility that threatened to devour her. Hours bled into one another until time lost its edges, until she could not tell whether she had been walking for minutes or days. Her vision blurred, her mind drifting into the dangerous fog of half-consciousness, where the line between hallucination and reality was razor-thin. It was in that haze that she saw the first glimmer of movement on the horizon. At first she thought it a trick of the stars, some mirage conjured by fatigue. But then the glimmer grew sharp and deliberate, like a beacon pulsing against the darkness. Her heart quickened, adrenaline slicing through her weariness. She dropped low, pressing herself against the sand, her eyes locked on the strange light. It flickered not like fire, not like a signal flare, but like something colder, mechanical. A pale glow sweeping rhythmically as though scanning the land. The phantom aircraft. It had returned. She felt it before she truly saw it, the low hum crawling through the air, vibrating in her bones. She raised her head and squinted against the night. There it was again, its silhouette almost invisible, its edges shimmering as if wrapped in the air itself. It moved soundlessly above the dunes, a predator in the sky, searching. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Was it here for her again, guiding her, or had it come to finish what it had started with that single crate? She tightened her grip on her rifle, though she knew a single soldier's weapon was nothing against something that could traverse the sky like a ghost. She waited, tense, watching as the craft drifted overhead, its strange pale glow sweeping across the sand. Then it paused, hovering. The glow centered on her position. Lyra's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She rose slowly, rifle hanging low but ready, her stance unflinching. If it was here to kill her, then she would die standing just as she had promised herself before. But the craft did not fire. Instead, the hum deepened, and another crate detached from its underbelly, descending in a controlled spiral until it struck the ground with a muffled thud not 10 paces away. The locks hissed, the lid sprang open, and inside she saw not just supplies but technology she had never laid eyes on before, sleek cartridges glowing faintly blue, medical injectors that pulsed with light, a compact device humming with energy like a heart. Her breath caught. This was no standard military issue, no equipment she had ever seen in her years of service. Whoever had sent this craft was not merely supplying her, they were arming her with tools beyond her comprehension. She stepped closer, her boots crunching in the frost-coated sand, and reached out with hesitant fingers. The cartridges were warm to the touch, humming faintly as if alive. She slid one into her rifle, and the weapon purred with sudden energy, its display flashing symbols she did not recognize. She swung it experimentally, feeling a strange weightlessness in the barrel, as though the weapon had been remade in her hands. The air seemed sharper around her, charged. A sound tore her from her awe, the howl of engines, distant but growing. She spun toward the horizon, her visor catching the faint glimmer of headlights cresting a dune. A raider convoy, half a dozen vehicles bristling with mounted guns, roaring toward her position. Somehow they had tracked her, and now they were closing in with a vengeance, the desert trembling beneath their wheels. Lyra's stomach twisted, but when she turned back toward the phantom aircraft for aid, it was gone, vanished as silently as it had come, leaving her with its strange gift. She stared at the convoy bearing down on her, at the guns flashing in the night, and then at the glowing cartridges locked into her rifle. Whatever this technology was, she would not waste it. She braced herself against the crate, took aim and squeezed the trigger. The rifle responded with a roar not of gunpowder but of energy, a searing bolt of light lancing across the desert and tearing the lead vehicle into molten shards. The explosion lit the dunes like daylight, and the raiders' howls of triumph twisted into screams of panic. Lyra's eyes widened, disbelief flooding her veins. She had never seen a weapon do that, not in all her years of combat. The convoy wavered, vehicles swerving in terror, but the others pressed forward, firing wildly into the night. Bullets stitched the sand around her, sparks skittering from her armor. She returned fire, each glowing round obliterating metal and flesh alike, carving craters into the earth. The weapon had no recoil, no hesitation, as if it were an extension of her will. She became a storm, her voice a wordless cry as she cut down vehicle after vehicle, until the desert was a graveyard of burning wrecks. At last, silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of flames. Lyra staggered, the rifle still glowing faintly in her grip, her chest heaving with every ragged breath. Her hands trembled, not from exhaustion but from the enormity of what she had just unleashed. She looked at the weapon, then at the crate, then back at the star-filled sky. Whoever they were, whoever controlled that phantom craft, they had just turned her into something more than a soldier. They had given her power she could barely comprehend. She dropped to her knees in the sand, surrounded by wreckage, the night alive with smoke and fire. And for the first time she felt not just the weight of survival, but the heavy, undeniable pull of destiny. Lyra remained kneeling in the sand, the glow of burning wreckage casting jagged shadows across her visor. Her chest rose and fell like a drumbeat, and her hands would not steady no matter how tightly she gripped the strange rifle. Around her lay the remains of men and machines, raiders who only hours ago had been predators certain of their kill. Now they were reduced to fire and silence, and she stood above them not as prey but as something they had never expected. She lifted her gaze to the sky again, half expecting the phantom craft to reveal itself, to hover overhead and offer her more gifts, or perhaps demand repayment. But there was only darkness and the distant shimmer of stars. The silence pressed heavily against her, filled with too many questions and no answers. She rose, staggering slightly, and turned her focus back to the crate. The energy cartridges glowed faintly, dozens of them stacked neatly, alongside the strange medical injectors and compact device that hummed like a living heart. She examined the device more closely, her fingers brushing over its surface. It was smooth, seamless, unlike anything she had seen, and as her touch lingered, the hum deepened, responding as though it sensed her. A ripple of light pulsed across its surface, and for a heartbeat she thought she heard something. Not a voice, not quite, but a vibration that resonated deep in her skull, like a word she almost recognized but could not fully grasp. She jerked her hand away, her breath quickening. The device went silent again, its hum settling back to a steady rhythm, waiting. She did not know whether to be grateful or terrified. She gathered what she could carry, strapping the cartridges and injectors into her pack, and reluctantly left the device behind. It was too large, too heavy, and too unknown to risk burdening herself with it in the middle of the desert. Yet as she turned away, she felt its absence like a weight pressing against her spine. She marched on into the night, her path lit by the glow of fires slowly dying behind her. The stars above watched her like indifferent gods, their cold brilliance offering no comfort. She pressed forward, driven now not only by survival but by the gnawing hunger for answers. Someone had chosen her, supplied her, armed her with impossible technology. That choice carried meaning whether she wanted it or not, and she needed to know what it was. Dawn crept slowly across the horizon, painting the dunes in pale light, and with it came the bitter bite of exhaustion. Her legs dragged through the sand, her armor heavy, her wounds aching despite the medkits. She stumbled more than once, catching herself just before collapsing. But each time she thought she might give in, her eyes would fall on the glowing cartridges strapped across her chest, and strength would return like fire in her veins. Whoever her benefactor was, they had not saved her only to let her die so soon. As the sun climbed higher, heat once again pressed down on her like a hammer. Sweat pooled under her armor, her throat dry despite careful rationing of water. She pressed on, her eyes scanning the horizon endlessly for signs of shelter, for any structure that might offer respite. At last she saw it, the faint outline of a watchtower rising from the sand, distant but unmistakable. Her heart leapt, her pace quickened despite the protest of her limbs. An outpost. She might not be alone in this wasteland after all. She forced herself onward, step by grueling step, until the tower grew larger, revealing low walls and the crumbling remains of fortifications. Relief surged in her chest, but it was short-lived. As she drew nearer, she realized the outpost was not manned by her allies. The banners that hung from its walls were torn but still bore the crude symbols of the raider clans. Smoke drifted from inside, and the sound of harsh laughter carried faintly across the sand. Her stomach sank. It was not sanctuary. It was another nest of vipers. She dropped to her stomach at the crest of a dune, peering through her visor at the activity below. Raiders moved within the walls, armed and watchful, though not expecting trouble. Their vehicles were scattered across the compound, patched together monstrosities bristling with weapons. She counted at least 24 fighters, maybe more. Ordinarily, the sight would have filled her with dread. But as her hand brushed the glowing rifle at her side, she felt something different stir in her chest. Not fear but grim resolve. They had hunted her, slaughtered her squad, burned everything she had known in this desert. Now, with this weapon in her hands, she had the power to answer them. For a long moment, she lay in the sand, torn between caution and vengeance. She could skirt around the outpost, continue her march toward friendly lines. But every bone in her body ached with the memory of her squad's screams, of Silva's humming cut short, of Juno's last glance before the world exploded around them. Those faces demanded justice. Slowly, deliberately, Lyra loaded another glowing cartridge into her rifle. She rose to one knee, the dawn sun at her back, and steadied her aim on the nearest guard. The energy bolt lanced across the distance, striking with surgical precision, and the guard crumpled silently into the dust. Panic spread through the outpost as raiders scrambled for weapons, shouting in alarm. Lyra advanced down the dune, her steps sure, her rifle roaring with each shot. Vehicles exploded, walls shattered, and men screamed as they were cut down by energy that burned hotter than fire. She moved like a specter, untouchable, her weapons slicing through their defenses as if they were paper. The outpost became chaos, flames licking the sky, structures collapsing under her relentless assault. Grenades from the crate detonated in showers of shrapnel, tearing through clustered fighters. One by one, the raiders fell until the compound was littered with smoking ruins. At last, the only sound was the crackle of fire and the rasp of her own breathing. She stood in the center of the outpost, surrounded by wreckage, her armor scorched, her visor cracked. Her chest heaved, her hands shook, but she was alive and they were not. She staggered to a half-collapsed wall and leaned against it, staring at the devastation she had wrought. A part of her recoiled at the scale of it, at the sheer inhuman efficiency of the weapon she wielded. But another part, darker and stronger, whispered that this was justice, that the desert itself demanded this cleansing fire. She let the rifle hang loose at her side and tilted her head back to the sky. Still no sign of the phantom craft. Still no answers. Only silence, smoke, and the growing weight of destiny pressing against her shoulders. She knew then that she was no longer just a soldier fighting for survival. She was something else, something the raiders would come to fear, something that even her own people might not understand. And whoever had chosen her, whoever had sent that phantom aircraft, had marked her for a path she could not yet see. The ruins of the raider outpost smoldered long into the day, smoke curling upward like black banners that the desert winds carried across the horizon. Lyra walked among the wreckage, stepping carefully over the shattered remnants of vehicles and the twisted bodies of her enemies. The silence here was deeper than the silence of the open dunes. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the ghosts of the men she had just cut down. She could still hear the echoes of their screams, the crackling roar of energy bolts tearing through steel and flesh. Yet beneath the weight of it she felt no guilt. They had ambushed her squad, butchered her people, and burned everything in their path. This was not slaughter. This was retribution. Still, she could not deny the unease that gnawed at her when she glanced at the glowing rifle in her hands. It hummed faintly even when idle, as though it lived, as though it was watching her in return. She wondered if it judged her actions or if it cared at all who wielded it. She shook the thought away and continued through the wreckage, searching for supplies. Most of the vehicles were useless now, burned-out shells, but she found water canisters still intact, crates of dried food, and even a functional radio buried beneath debris. She pulled it free, brushing ash from its battered casing, and turned the dials with careful fingers. Static hissed, broken only by the occasional burst of garbled transmission. She adjusted the frequency again and again, her patience thinning, until at last a faint voice crackled through, distorted but unmistakably human. South sector. Hold until reinforcements, repeat, hold position. Lyra froze, her breath catching. Allies. Somewhere out there, not far beyond this wasteland, her people were still fighting, still holding the line. A surge of determination burned through her exhaustion. She would find them. She would not let the deaths of her squad end in silence. Slinging the radio across her back, she gathered what supplies she could carry, then set fire to what remained of the outpost, denying the raiders anything of value should they return. The flames spread quickly, feeding on the shattered structures, painting the sky with thick columns of smoke. She turned her back on it and began her march once more, her boots crunching over sand and ash. The sun rose higher, heat pressing down like a smothering hand, but Lyra's steps did not falter. She had a direction now, however vague, and that was enough. Hours stretched into an endless blur of dunes, her body aching, her throat dry despite careful sips of water. The desert was a cruel teacher, stripping away weakness until only willpower remained. She moved with the relentlessness of someone who had nothing left but the promise of vengeance and the fragile thread of survival. It was near dusk when she sensed it again, the hum, low and resonant, vibrating in her chest before her ears caught the sound. She lifted her head, scanning the skies, and there it was, the phantom craft, gliding silently against the fading light, its form shimmering as though it were part of the sky itself. Her pulse quickened. She raised her rifle in acknowledgement, though she knew they could see her whether she saluted or not. The craft slowed, hovering above her path, and then, as before, a crate detached, descending with eerie precision until it struck the sand near her feet. The locks disengaged with a hiss, the lid springing open to reveal another assortment of supplies, more energy cartridges, ration packs, and this time something else. A small, sleek device no larger than her palm, its surface smooth and reflective, pulsing faintly with blue light. Lyra picked it up carefully, turning it in her hands. The moment her skin touched it, her visor flickered, data streams flashing across her display in symbols she could not read. She gasped, nearly dropping it, but the light steadied, forming lines and shapes that shifted until they resolved into a map. Her visor projected the image clearly now. The desert stretched before her in miniature, dunes marked in sharp relief, with a single glowing point pulsing faintly to the west. She stared, heart pounding. They were guiding her. Whoever controlled this craft not only supplied her but now directed her path. She wanted to scream questions into the sky, to demand answers, but the craft remained. Silent, its hum deepening once as if to remind her it was still watching, then fading away as it vanished once more into the clouds. Lyra clenched her jaw, pocketed the device, and began marching toward the pulsing marker on the map. She felt the pull of it now, like a thread tugging her through the wasteland, every step carrying her closer to whatever truth awaited her. Night fell quickly, shadows stretching long across the sand, but the map's faint glow remained, a beacon in the darkness. She pushed herself until her legs trembled and at last allowed herself a brief rest in the shelter of a rocky outcrop. She set her rifle within arm's reach, unsealed a ration pack, and forced herself to eat though her stomach twisted. As she chewed, her eyes returned again and again to the glowing marker on the device. It pulsed steadily, patiently, as though it knew she would come, as though it had always known. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of burning skies and phantom voices whispering in languages she could not understand. She woke before dawn, sweat slicking her skin, the desert wind cold against her visor. She gathered her supplies, checked her weapon, and pressed onward. By midday, the dunes gave way to jagged ridges of black stone, the sand thinning into rocky ground. Her map's marker pulsed brighter now, closer, urging her forward. She climbed, her boots scraping against stone, her body screaming with fatigue but her will unyielding. At the crest of a ridge, she stopped, breath caught in her throat. Below stretched a valley carved into the earth, and at its heart lay something she could scarcely comprehend. A structure, vast and gleaming, half buried in the rock as though it had slept here for centuries. Its surface shimmered faintly like the phantom craft, edges indistinct, blending with the earth around it. Towers jutted from its core like broken spines, their tips glowing faintly with pale light. It was no outpost, no raider fortress, no human creation. It was something older, something alien. Lyra sank to one knee, staring, her heart hammering against her ribs. The phantom craft, the weapons, the crates, it all pointed here. This was the source, the reason she had been spared, the destiny she had been forced toward. She tightened her grip on her rifle, eyes fixed on the impossible structure below. She did not know whether it would offer salvation or destruction, but she knew with absolute certainty that her life had been leading to this moment. She rose slowly, squared her shoulders against the wind, and began her descent into the valley. The descent into the valley was slower than she expected, each step down the craggy slope carrying the weight of inevitability. The air grew cooler as she approached the basin, the wind cutting in strange, unnatural currents as though diverted by unseen walls. Lyra steadied herself with one hand against the rock, eyes never leaving the gleaming structure at the center. It loomed larger with every step, no longer an indistinct blur of towers and spines but a defined construct of impossible geometry, its surfaces shifting subtly as though resisting her attempt to comprehend them. By the time she reached the valley floor, the structure towered above her like a cathedral built by gods who had never seen the human eye. She moved cautiously, rifle raised, though some part of her knew instinctively that bullets and blades would mean nothing here. The device in her pocket pulsed faster, each beat syncing eerily with her own heartbeat, drawing her toward a narrow opening that yawned at the base of the construct. She hesitated, every instinct screaming danger, but the hum of the rifle on her shoulder reminded her she was already far beyond turning back. She stepped inside. Darkness swallowed her, vast and oppressive, until the walls themselves came alive with veins of pale light, illuminating her path in rippling streams of energy. The floor beneath her feet was smooth, metallic, and yet it flexed slightly as though alive. She tightened her grip on the rifle and pressed forward, her breath echoing in the cavernous corridor. Strange symbols flickered on the walls, the same shifting language she had glimpsed on her visor when she first touched the device. This time, however, the symbols resolved into words she could almost understand. Fragments slipped into her mind unbidden. Conduit, awakening, integration. She whispered the words aloud without meaning to, her voice trembling as though speaking them gave them power. The corridor widened into a chamber that stretched higher than she could see, its walls lined with towering structures like stasis pods, each glowing faintly from within. Lyra approached the nearest one cautiously and froze when she saw the outline of a figure suspended inside. Humanoid, tall, its skin dark and ridged with luminous markings. Its chest rose and fell slowly, shallow but steady. Alive. She stumbled back, her pulse racing. Aliens, preserved for who knew how long, hidden beneath the desert sands while humanity waged its petty wars above. She looked around and saw more of them, dozens, hundreds, slumbering in their crystalline coffins. Her voice cracked as she whispered to the chamber, "What are you?" The rifle hummed louder in response as though answering. She lifted it, and for the first time she noticed the markings etched along its barrel matched the patterns glowing on the walls. She understood then with bone-deep certainty, the weapon had come from here, from them. The craft that delivered it, the crates, the map, it was all part of the same design. She had not been chosen by chance. She had been recruited. The realization chilled her, but before she could process it further, the chamber trembled, a low vibration shuddering through the floor. The stasis pods glowed brighter, pulses of light rippling from one to the next like a signal passing through a network. Lyra shielded her eyes as beams of energy shot upward into the chamber's peak, converging into a blazing column of light. Her visor crackled with static, then cleared to reveal a holographic figure standing before her. It was tall, humanoid but not human, its body composed of light and shifting patterns. Its voice resonated directly in her mind, bypassing her ears. "You carry the weapon. You carry the key." Lyra staggered back, rifle raised instinctively. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The figure tilted its head, luminous eyes studying her with unsettling calm. "We are the architects. We built this place before your kind walked the earth. We slumbered until the stars aligned, until the signal was answered." "Signal?" she demanded. "You mean the weapon? The drops? The map?" The figure nodded once. "Tools? Gifts? Tests? To find the one who endures, who survives the fire of your dying world. You are the last." Lyra's mouth went dry. "The last? My people are still out there, I heard them on the radio." The figure's eyes dimmed slightly as though pitying her. "Fragments? Echoes? Your species burns itself to ash. You are all that remains in this place. The weight of its words crashed down on her, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream at it, to deny everything, but in her heart she knew the truth. She had seen the massacres, the ruined outposts, the endless bloodshed. If there were survivors, they were scattered and broken, shadows of a dying race. She lowered her rifle slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Why me?" The figure stepped closer, its light washing over her like sunlight. "Through water. Because you survived. Because you fought when all others fell. Because the weapon chose you." Lyra shook her head, trembling. "I didn't choose any of this. I don't want to be part of your plan." The figure's gaze hardened. "Choice is an illusion. You are already bound to us. The weapon reshaped you. Even now your body carries our mark." At its words, Lyra felt the hum of the rifle merge with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She dropped it in horror, but it clung to her hand as though fused to her flesh. Panic surged through her, but the figure raised a hand and the fear ebbed against her will, replaced by cold clarity. "You stand at the threshold," it intoned. "Join with us in ascent. Refuse and fade with the remnants of your kind." Lyra's knees buckled, her mind torn between terror and defiance. Images flashed across her vision, her squad's faces, the fires of the outpost, the raiders falling beneath her rifle, the phantom craft hovering like a watchful sentinel. She saw humanity's ruins, barren cities, and then a vision of stars unfolding, alien worlds teeming with light, endless horizons she could scarcely imagine. The figure extended its hand, light crackling around its fingers. "Choose." Lyra's breath came ragged, sweat dripping beneath her visor. She wanted to turn and run, to escape the valley, the structure, the fate being forced upon her. But where would she go? The desert stretched endless and merciless, the raiders would return, her people were gone. Only this remained, this impossible choice. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached out, her fingers brushed the hand of light, and in that instant the world shattered into brilliance. The chamber dissolved, the walls and pods and vaulted ceiling collapsing into streams of data and fire, and she felt her body suspended in a void that was neither space nor time. Her skin burned with a sensation beyond pain, as though every atom of her being was being unraveled and rewritten simultaneously. She tried to scream but no sound came. Her voice was drowned in the thunder of voices that were not her own. Countless minds pressed against hers, echoes of the architects, the ones who had built this place, their thoughts flowing like rivers of fire and ice. They surged through her veins, their knowledge crashing into her consciousness in waves she could barely withstand. She saw stars born and die in bursts of unimaginable beauty. She saw civilizations rise and collapse, vast empires spanning galaxies falling into silence like sandcastles at the mercy of the tide. She saw humanity's brief flicker of existence, fragile and brutal, fighting endlessly against itself until nothing remained but ash and whispers. She wanted to let go, to tear herself free, but the weapon bound her like chains of fire, fusing her mind with theirs. "Do not resist," the voices thundered. "You are conduit. You are bridge." She shook her head violently, gasping against the current. "I'm not your bridge. I'm just a soldier, I'm nothing." But the voices roared back, neither cruel nor kind, only absolute. "You are chosen because you endure." The flood slowed, the brilliance dimmed, and she found herself standing once more on solid ground, though it was not the chamber she had entered. This was something far older, far larger. An endless hall stretched in all directions, lined with towering spires of crystal that pulsed with inner light. Above, a sky of shifting auroras rippled, stars bending and twisting in impossible constellations. Lyra clutched the rifle still fused to her hand and looked down at her body. Her armor was cracked, her skin glowing faintly with the same pattern she had seen on the pots, etched into her flesh as though branded by light itself. She staggered forward, disoriented, and the echoing steps of her boots reverberated like thunder. Ahead, at the center of the hall, stood a dais upon which rose a structure resembling both throne and machine, alive with energy. The holographic figure waited there, no longer translucent but solid, its presence radiating authority. "You stand within the archive," it said, its voice reverberating through her bones. "This is the nexus of our memory, the place where the past and future converge. You have touched our essence and in return we will touch yours." She wanted to spit defiance, to tell them she never asked for this, but the words caught in her throat. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of understanding flickered. This was more than conquest. This was survival, an inheritance passed not by blood but by fire. She stepped onto the dais and the figure reached toward her chest. Light seared through her body as vision struck her mind like lightning. She saw herself standing among alien stars, leading fleets of vessels unlike anything humanity had ever built. She saw her voice commanding both human and architect alike, bridging two species into one. She saw herself as both savior and destroyer, her choices carving futures out of stone. Then the visions turned darker. She saw her face twisted in rage, planets burning under her command, her weapon striking down friend and foe alike as she gave in to the same endless cycle that had destroyed humanity. She saw herself enthroned in power, alone, the last echo of her kind, a tyrant wearing the mask of destiny. The figure's voice pierced through the storm. This is the choice. You may wield the archive to guide your kind beyond extinction, or you may consume it as so many before have done. You are bridge, but you are also blade. Lyra's chest heaved, sweat dripping as her knees threatened to buckle. Her mind raced back through her life, the squadmates who had died screaming, the children she had seen starve in ruined towns, the raiders who carved joy from others' suffering. Humanity had destroyed itself long before this valley, long before she picked up the rifle. Could she really guide what was left of it to something better? Or would she simply repeat the same cycle on a grander scale? Her grip tightened on the rifle. The weapon pulsed like a living thing waiting for her decision. I don't want to be your god, she whispered, voice cracking. The figure tilted its head. Nor do we ask it. We ask only that you carry the archive forward, into a future that is no longer ours. She lowered her head, trembling. The weight was unbearable, but she knew now there was no escape. To reject this would mean to fade into dust, the last human wandering a wasteland until her bones joined the desert. To accept meant to carry a burden greater than any war, greater than any grief she had ever known. Slowly she raised her head, her eyes burning with a fierce resolve born not from destiny but from defiance. Then I'll carry it, she said, voice steady at last. But I carry it my way, not as your weapon, not as your tyrant. As myself. The figure regarded her silently, then bowed its head once. So it is chosen. The hall erupted in light. The spires blazed, the auroras above ignited into cascading ribbons of fire, and the archive surged into her chest like a second heartbeat. She staggered but did not fall, her body trembling with new strength and terrible knowledge. The rifle dissolved into her arm, its patterns fusing with her veins, until it was no longer a weapon but a part of her very being. When the brilliance faded, she stood once more in the valley beneath the desert stars. The structure behind her was silent, its light extinguished, the pods dormant. The desert wind howled softly, carrying the scent of dust and ash. She looked up at the sky, vast and cold, and for the first time she did not feel small. The archive pulsed within her, showing her distant signals, faint human transmissions scattered across the globe, fragments of survivors clinging to life. She could find them now. She could unite them. She could lead them beyond this dying world, or she could fall as countless others had. The choice was hers. Lyra pulled her cracked visor from her head and let the night air wash over her face. The stars shimmered above, countless and eternal, watching. She whispered to the silence, to her fallen comrades, to the architects who had left her this impossible gift. I'll try. And with that, she turned from the valley and began to walk into the desert, the archive burning inside her like a second soul. The world was broken, the future uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt something dangerously close to hope. The desert stretched endlessly around her, the dunes rolling like frozen waves under the pale starlight, each crest casting long shadows in the silver glow of the moons. Lyra walked steadily, her boots sinking into the sand, her body trembling not from exhaustion but from the weight of what now lived inside her. The archive pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, whispering fragments of knowledge, maps of lost cities, coordinates of survivors scattered across continents, and faint echoes of voices calling through the static of ruined skies. Each step was both freedom and burden. She could feel the immensity of choice pressing down on her like a second gravity. Ahead, the desert wind carried with it a sound she hadn't expected. Smoke and engines, the distant rumble of machines. She crouched low instinctively, her soldiers training sharp as ever, eyes narrowing at the faint glow rising beyond the horizon. Through the archive's sight, her vision expanded, overlaying layers of reality until she could see more clearly. A convoy, armored vehicles bristling with scavenged weapons, carrying the banners of one of the raider clans that haunted the wasteland. Their engines growled like beasts, their headlights cutting harsh beams into the night, and their cargo was cages, iron rattling with movement. Prisoners. Human prisoners. Lyra's teeth clenched, memories flashing unbidden of the raids she had fought to repel years ago, of civilians dragged screaming into the night, never seen again. The archive surged within her, offering solutions, strategies, weapons she could manifest with a thought, each possibility branching into futures of fire and blood. Her hand twitched instinctively toward the rifle that was no longer a rifle but an extension of her very flesh. She could wipe them out in an instant. She could reduce their machines to molten slag, free the captives, and walk away leaving only ash behind. But the visions twisted, showing her another path, the prisoners slaughtered in the chaos, the captives' eyes wide with terror as she unleashed a storm too great to control. She bit down hard, shutting the visions out. Not like this, she muttered under her breath. The archive adjusted, recalibrating, showing alternatives less destructive but slower, riskier. She could infiltrate, break cages, sow confusion without annihilation. It was the harder path, the human path. For a long moment she remained crouched, the desert wind whipping her hair, her mind torn between the godlike power now at her disposal and the fragile conscience that refused to let her become what the architects had warned against. Finally she exhaled and began moving. Her form shimmered, light bending around her at the archive's command, cloaking her in distortion as she crept closer to the convoy. The vehicles rumbled into a canyon, engines echoing off the stone, and set up camp by torchlight. Raiders laughed coarsely, dragging their captives out and chaining them near a fire. Lyra watched from the shadows of the cliffs above, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the prisoners, half-starved, beaten, their faces hollow yet still burning with the stubborn spark of survival. Her chest tightened as she recognized that look. She had worn it herself too many times. She descended silently, moving through the shadows like a phantom. The archive flowed through her body, enhancing every motion, each step silent, each breath measured. She slipped behind a guard, her hand flashing out to silence him before he could cry, his body dissolving into particles of light that the archive absorbed. She froze, horrified. She hadn't meant to unmake him. The archive pulsed calmly, offering explanation. His matter was not destroyed but dispersed, converted, folded into memory. To her, it was still a killing and the weight of it pressed into her bones. She forced herself onward. Cage by cage she moved, breaking locks with a touch of her glowing hand, whispering for silence as wide eyes turned to her in disbelief. Some reached out to her, trembling, whispering words of thanks, of awe, calling her angel, savior, ghost. She shook her head fiercely. Just quiet. Move when I tell you. One by one she freed them until nearly 24 ragged survivors crouched behind her in the shadows, waiting. Then came the complication. A child, no more than 8, had been taken by the raiders into a tent at the camp's center, her thin cries muffled beneath the raiders' laughter. Lyra's jaw set, rage boiling in her chest. The archive surged, eager to unleash fury, but she held it tight, forcing her mind into clarity. There was no choice. She could not leave the child. She signaled the captives to wait, then strode into the camp's heart, her cloak of distortion faltering under the strength of her fury. The raiders turned, startled, hands going to their weapons, but she was faster. Light exploded from her body in a burst that blinded them, her hands striking out to seize rifles and melt their barrels before they could be raised. She tore open the tent, finding the child bound and terrified, and scooped her into her arms. The raiders screamed, firing blindly, bullets sparking harmlessly against the field of energy the archive projected. Lyra's voice boomed, not entirely her own but amplified by the chorus of architects within her. Run! The captives fled, stumbling into the night, hurting the child among them. Lyra turned her fury loose then but controlled, precise. Blades of light cut through chains, weapons, fuel tanks, reducing the raiders' machines to heaps of twisted metal. She struck down without killing where she could, shattering their weapons, crippling their engines. Yet a few fell, screaming, their bodies consumed by light as hers had consumed the guard. Each one burned into her soul, the archive murmuring that it was necessary, that survival required sacrifice. By the time the captives vanished into the desert, the raiders' camp was a smoking ruin, its warriors broken and scattered. Lyra stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving, her body glowing faintly with the archive's energy. She looked down at her hands, trembling, unsure if they still belonged to her or to something far greater, far more terrible. The archive whispered of possibilities ahead, of uniting these survivors, of building something new from the ashes. Yet beneath the whispers was a silence that was hers alone, a silence filled with doubt. She had saved them tonight, but at what cost? How many more would she need to save, and how many more would she need to destroy? She turned and followed the faint tracks of the captives, catching up as dawn painted the desert in hues of crimson and gold. They looked at her with awe and fear, the child clutching her hand with blind trust, the others whispering words of reverence she wanted no part of. She met their eyes, forcing her voice steady. I'm not a savior. I'm just someone who survived. But if you want a future, if you want to live, then follow me. Not because I'm chosen, not because I'm holy, because together we might be more than what's left behind. For a long moment there was silence, broken only by the desert wind. Then slowly, one by one, heads nodded. The spark of hope spread among them like wildfire. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, the archive pulsing warmly in her chest, and for the first time since she touched the hand of light, she felt she had taken a step not toward destiny but toward choice. The end.